But then
I got it. I got it. I
there
got
you
it.
go.
Here we go. Okay, I'm going to push this away for a second and then move everybody over. And we're going to get going here. This is some quotes, and I hope everybody can see this on a book that I just read. And my background is in science and environmental education, and the last few years I've been thinking a lot about ways that we can work with students about climate education and how important that may be. And this book by Peter Sutoris on education from the Anthropocene, has some two questions that really struck me in the very beginning of the book that I think I wanted to share with you before we talk specifically about Florida here. What does it mean to educate generations of people whose decisions and actions will determine the habitability of the planet and the survival of human beings as a species? And the second one is, how may education enhance or hinder students' ability to imagine and bring about alternative futures? I think those are really important questions for us to be asking these days as we look at the impacts of climate change, and how, as educators, we're working with students. So another question to ask is, why should we organize a Florida Climate Educators Network? Florida's got a lot of unique features, as you all know, I'm sure. We are sort of ground zero for some of the important impacts of climate change, like sea level rise, and recently we've been seeing things like the terrible heat we've been having this summer. And, we've been seeing things, our biology impacted, like the dying of some coral reefs here because of the heat. So there's some unique things about Florida that I think it's important for us to be considering why we should do climate change education in the state, and why we should have an organization to help support something like that. And we've got our challenges politically to do something like that around here. So it's interesting. In contrast, and I've heard some information about California, and they're developing a network out there of educators through their schooling, both at the university level and K-12, and they're interacting with each other to promote that kind of thing. We have our challenges doing that kind of thing in Florida, but I hope we'll try to work on that. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to put this network together. And the idea is to have Google groups, which we've established. Again, if you want to become a member, you'll be participating in that Google group to exchange information. Liliana gave some great information about another network on the national level that had some fantastic climate education, and I learned about that through her and that network. And I hope we'll have these monthly opportunities to meet and hear different presenters who may help us organize and are thinking about climate change and find new ways to teach and not to teach, what is effective and not effective for teaching students. So what we'll generally try to do at these meetings is have a 15 to 20-minute presentation from our speaker, and then some time for our audience to raise questions and interact with our speaker and maybe each other to sort of do some brainstorming about what concepts might apply to their own learners and how they can create activities and lessons and engage their students to do some work on climate change. I wanted to share a couple of other things with you today, and we're going to get into specifics about the issue of heat today. And Jane was kind enough to join us, and I'll do a formal introduction with her in a minute. And I just wanted to share a couple of things. This is just, some of these are new quotes that I've just found out. And some of you, I think, know Bill Nelson, and when he was a senator here in the state of Florida, he's now the administrator for NASA. So I think many of you may know that. But he came out with a statement the other day that I think is important for us. NASA data confirms what billions around the world literally felt. Temperatures in July 2023 made it the hottest month on record. In every corner of the country, Americans are right now experiencing firsthand the effects of the climate crisis. The science is clear. We must act now to protect our communities and planet. It's the only one we have. And then last night I saw this program on PBS had this news hour, and this is a clip that's actually available online. I'm not going to show you the clip. I just got a screenshot from this, but they had an interview with Michael Mann. It was a rather long, 6-minute interview. And they showed, and I don't know if this is, this was yesterday. I don't know if what the situation is today. Our Midwest had incredible heat wave going on. And again, more of this problem with heat. And Michael Mann is a scientist. Some of you probably know him at the University of Pennsylvania, and talking about the relationship of climate change to the heat we've been having, to the terrible fires in Maui and some of these other areas, and the trauma that we've been experiencing this summer because of this kind of thing. So I'm going to stop sharing here and let's see, introduce Jane here in a second. You can see all of you. So we're very excited to have Jane presenting today. And I first met her in her role when she was Chief Resiliency Officer for the city of Miami. Met her a few years ago when I was actually doing some advocacy work for a group, the community groups, the Sea Level Rise Solutions group. And we talked a little bit about some of the work that group was doing. And I got to, then shortly after that, I think she took this position as a Chief Heat Officer for Miami-Dade County. And I got excited about that. And she was kind enough to give a presentation to a national group, advocacy group that I was also involved with at the time. In her job, and I'll read some of her job description so everybody is familiar with that. And her job as Chief Heat Officer at Miami-Dade County, Jane is responsible for improving coordination and accelerating existing heat protection efforts and initiating new work that reduces the risks and impacts of heat stress and extreme heat for vulnerable communities in Miami-Dade County. On behalf of Miami-Dade County and Resilient 305, the Chief Heat Officer will develop and launch a multi-stakeholder climate and heat health task force to analyze existing conditions and vulnerabilities and identify strategies to address current and future impacts of extreme heat on human health, lives, and livelihoods. From her LinkedIn site, Jane describes herself as an advisor, connector, and accelerator of public and private partnerships, ventures, and policies that address climate resilience. For over 30 years, she has led organizations and initiatives within the private, public, and nonprofit sectors in the field of environmental risk management, social entrepreneurship, education, arts, community development, and urban resilience. And I just wanted to give you a couple of examples from her resume. I think, she's got such an interesting background. I wanted to share a couple of these with you. This was sort of a recent thing where she was the executive director. I guess it's Oolite Arts. And I don't know how to pronounce oolitic limestone, so I always get that wrong. But anyway, I think it's Oolite Arts. In Miami, Fort Lauderdale, where it was formerly the Arts Center of South Florida, as she was responsible for successful financial, programmatic, and reputational turnaround of this nonprofit, offering subsidized artist studios, art education for youth and adults, and exhibition programs. She facilitated a strategic planning process that resulted in renewed public and private support to the organization. She was also the business development environmental manager at Cultural Survival in the Boston area, where she supported the startup of an entrepreneurial trading venture in non-timber products from tropical rainforests, directed research and writing on the market potential of economic plant species, and developed guidelines for sustainable harvesting of forest species for the USAID. Jane, thank you so much for joining us. This is a really interesting variety. I don't know if tonight we have any art teachers on here, but we need to recruit a few for this effort. So Jane, please take us into some of your world there.
Yeah, and thank you, Scott. It's really a pleasure to be amongst educators. I have great respect, and particularly given this is the startup of a new year, you have very busy schedules, whether you're in the classroom or have kids in a classroom, whatever you're doing, it's a busy time. So I appreciate everyone joining this evening and for Scott inviting me. One of the experiences that you didn't mention is that I was the first executive director of Dream and Green, that has the Green Schools Challenge and works with schools across South Florida to with lesson plans. And I encourage you, if you're not part of the Green Schools Challenge and you're in a K through 12 school, to consider it, because there's all sorts of great resources and lesson plans there. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started from the beginning. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Yeah, great. Okay, so yes, I was hired by our mayor, Danielle Levine Cava, to address the increasing health and economic risks associated with extreme heat here. So we're going to talk about the current and future risks, who's most at risk, because it is very unequal in how heat impacts our communities, what Miami-Dade County is doing about it, and a little bit about what you can do. And I'm going to try to get through this real quickly so we can, because dialogue, question and answer is my favorite part of any presentation. So heat is the leading weather-related killer. It's more than hurricanes, floods, tornadoes. And if you look at excess heat-related deaths, it's more than all of those combined, globally, nationally, and here in South Florida, and in Florida. It's not only because in Florida, our combination of chronic high heat and humidity can cause a heat-related illness, but it also can bring on a heart attack. It can bring on a psychotic episode. It can make you dizzy and end up in a traumatic injury. It can exacerbate lung conditions, diabetes. There's a lot. For pregnant women with high heat exposure, it can result in negative birth outcomes. The good news with all of this is that heat-related illnesses and deaths are preventable, and through not only our education and outreach, but other assistance that we provide to help people manage the risk as well as mitigate our urban heat. That's how we can manage it. And I'll get into some of the individual populations, but our average minimum temperature, this is Miami-Dade County, but if people are in South Florida, if they go to the Southeast Climate Change Compact, they have the average minimum temperatures for Broward County, Palm Beach County, and Monroe County increases as well. And it's been about 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And minimum temperature is important because if people can't cool down at night, it's more dangerous. And that's since 1985. But because we're always so close to 90 degrees, we've had this dramatic increase in days over 90 degrees since 1970. And as we move forward, our heat indices are getting into the extreme and dangerous zones of a heat index of 100 and 105. Historically, not only since 1971, but even in the last 14 years, we've had an average of only 6 days of heat index where the heat index reaches 105 or above. And this year alone, we've had well over 40. So we're well on our way to that 3 months of the year with a heat index of 105 because of this is an unusual year. Hopefully it won't continue at this level, but we don't know. And it's getting hotter, not only because of climate change, but how we develop as cities. This is true globally. The more asphalt, more built environment, less trees, less vegetation, more waste heat from cars and buildings, all of this contribute to resulting in about up to 10 degrees difference between our urban environments and our natural ecosystems. And it's distributed very unequally. This is a map of Miami-Dade County. And on the left is our census blocks by census tracts by median income. And the whites are the lowest median income. And on the right are our urban tree canopy coverage by percent, and the whites are areas are less than 10% tree canopy. So you can see how much it aligns by socioeconomic demographics. And we did a study. We looked at the heat-related emergency department visits and hospitalizations by zip code in Miami-Dade County. And the disparity is pretty high. We have certain zip codes that have over 4 times the number of emergency department visits and hospitalizations than other zip codes. So, and the strongest correlating factors of the zip codes with the highest rates of illnesses is high percentage of poverty for the hospitalizations. That's because of the social determinants of health. When you have so many different factors they're struggling with, that can lead to much more severe heat-related illnesses. And emergency department visits, daytime surface temperature was the highest correlation, followed by outdoor workers. And then what's important for all of you is households with children 5 to 18. Because kids are in camps, in sports, in recreating outside, and they're not necessarily aware of all the precautions they need to take, it's pretty common that kids can have heat-related incidences, mostly exhaustion. God forbid that it's a heat stroke and is fatal. So we mapped our vulnerability in the county. The other compound risk is with hurricanes and a widespread power outage. We all saw that with Hurricane Irma in 2017 when we lost 12 people in a nursing home. Luckily, the state passed a law requiring all nursing homes, assisted living, to have the generator power to keep a community room cool for 4 days and have the fuel for it. And that's been enforced pretty well across the state. But we know that there are a lot more people that would be at risk. So as Scott mentioned earlier, I was charged with putting together a task force. We had the woman in the picture there is Dr. Cheryl Holder. She's an internist that has spent her career working with vulnerable populations and teaching medical professionals to work with vulnerable populations. And she's a major also climate advocate. She launched the Florida Clinicians for Climate Action. So she's really working with healthcare professionals around climate education. But she was my co-chair. And then we had representatives from the National Weather Service, university partners, our state health department, community-based organizations, municipalities, different departments within the county, and people with lived experience from the vulnerable communities. We had 15 members. The 2 citizen members were selected and given a stipend to participate. And then we had a series of like 6 workshops that invited everybody, the public, anyone who wanted to come and provide input. And that's really, we resulted in this like collective action strategy where we have all those players involved in the recommendations in our action plan as partners. So these are all people who are involved and people who are part of the solution for our extreme heat action plan. It's organized around 3 goals. We have 19 actions. I'm not going to get into them in detail, but one area is all around our heat season campaign, informing people, lots of different trainings, summer camp providers, cooling site staff, disaster volunteers in the community. We're now doing a series of trainings for employers, for outdoor workers, and seeking some protections for outdoor workers. The next goal area is helping people cool their homes affordably, efficiently, and with minimum impact to our greenhouse gas emissions as possible. So we're expanded our weatherization programs. I was on a call today with a private investor who's going to help us out with some high efficient AC units for a low income population. And we want to make sure our evacuation facilities and cooling centers have the backup power necessary to keep people cool in the event of a widespread power outage. And the last one is the long-term strategy, is really how do we mitigate our urban heat islands, bring more green, bring more trees, cool pavements, cool building materials, less waste heat, to not only mitigate our urban heat islands, but pretty much all those solutions also either sequester carbon or reduce our emissions. So just a couple of things to think about if you're working with kids or young people, or just yourself or your employees. It's pretty much can be dangerously hot outside anytime from May to end of October here in Florida. So you want to make sure you have cool drinking water on site. If you're exerting a lot of energy, you have to introduce electrolytic drinks at some point. It's about 1 every 3 or 4 drinks, or you could actually be fully hydrated and still have heat exhaustion. Happened to my daughter, in fact, so I emphasize that one. Shaded and cool areas, you want to make sure that the kids take breaks, get sunscreen, etc. Some pretty obvious things, but it's just things to think about. Also good to know, I'm not going to get it, there's way too many words, but the Zachary Martin Act was passed in the state of Florida for all high school athletics because Zachary Martin was a high school football player who died of a heat stroke in football practice. And it requires all athletes and coaches to do a virtual training to make sure that they're monitoring the temperature using a wet bulb globe temperature, and taking certain precautions under different thresholds. So it's just something to be aware of, that our state does have good laws on that. And unfortunately, we do not have any protections for our outdoor workers, which we have many, but we do have some protection for our high school athletes, which is a good thing. So with that, this is my website, some resources to know, and please sign up for our newsletter if you're interested. But that website has all the vulnerability analysis. It has our much more detail on our extreme heat action plan and what we're actually up to. And I'm happy to answer any questions about our specific actions in any of those goal areas. But I like to get into conversation. So I'm going to stop sharing and let us do that.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much. That was wonderful introduction to the issue and some of your work there. Let me just check and see. Actually, you've been listening to you and not monitoring here the question and answers if we have any. We have a.
You can also raise their hand if they want.
Yeah, if you could see, let me see if you can you see everybody, or you can scroll through, and maybe that's a good way to do it. If there are people that want to raise their hand, or they have that little reaction button at the bottom that people want to
Usually
do a
if they raise
virtual.
their hand, move it to the main screen. I think I see Liliana. No. Or is that a different? No, that's my scroller.
I'm gonna look through there. And I'm gonna look down at the bottom. And
There we go.
well, I'll start off. I'll tell you what. Oh, David does. Go ahead,
Yeah, we
David.
have David and Mary. So
Scott, you want to go?
No, go ahead, please. I'm just waiting. I was going to prime the pump a little bit, but I'm glad you're.
Yeah, sure. Oh, hang on. Sorry, I think my camera's backwards, so I'll just. Sorry, I got back from an exercise. Hey, everyone. Jane, so nice to be here with you. And just to confirm, I'm here in country. There's a beautiful orchid right there up on that tree. So here I am in Dade. From an educational standpoint, I'm very interested in the unique way that heat can impact certain people, the non-obvious ways. And Miami's flat. I should say all of Florida's flat. It has no snow. There's no state income tax. And in certain areas, we have great medical centers. And so people with disabilities are uniquely called to this place. And I wonder what the chief heat officer thinks about that opportunity. Because, for example, some people who are paralyzed, they're in a wheelchair, it looks like their legs don't work, and they also can't sweat. And they're at a unique risk there. So there's an educational opportunity, I think, here to talk about and anyone on this call can ask me about this, to educate about non-obvious heat risks. Yeah, Jane, if you have anything there, I'd love to hear it. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, David. We do include disabled in most of our messaging as people who are more vulnerable to heat, for sure. You know, I welcome recommendations on that front, because I'll be honest, we didn't have a lot of input from that community in our plan development stage. So it would be helpful to think through, particularly, like, is there particular things we should do when there's a heat advisory or heat warning, like we do with our outreach to unsheltered and to messaging about cooling sites? We could potentially activate the special needs to get to cooling sites, transportation. You know, we do have that special needs registry in Miami-Dade County.
Yeah, which is quite populated.
Yeah.
Yeah, very happy to help with that. From my research, I have come to the understanding that a lot of it, and this is in collaboration with NWS Miami, who I know you work with. A lot of it might just be population specific communication. So would really love to work with you on that, and also to help mobilize the community, because I come across that situation where those who have the most to lose often are the ones whose voices are the hardest to hear. And I have some solutions there. So
yeah, no, I think it's a factor of just how we were late to the game to focus on extreme heat itself. We, you know, we're known internationally for our hurricane and sea level rise risk. But when you went out to the most vulnerable communities and asked them their top concern around climate change, it's extreme heat. It's not those.
Oh, that's actually great to hear, because from my research on people with disabilities, they actually don't see heat as a problem, which is a problem. So that's a big educational opportunity.
Well, that is a common problem in the general population as well, is making sure people understand the risks. Yeah, so let's follow up on some suggested messaging and suggested avenues for messaging. That would be great.
And I can link you with these people too, if you want them as lived experience advisors in these feedback sessions or workshops. I think you said. I can link you to some of the key players. Yeah. So
great.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you again, Jane. We had you about a year ago come and talk to us at the League of Women Voters Clean Energy Action. So
yes, I remember. Your name is quite familiar.
Yeah. Well, I am curious about the outdoor worker topic. You said your task force really didn't dive into that.
No.
Is there a reason they didn't dive into it? And on the topic, do you have some ideas on what we should be doing?
So good question, because, you know, at a state level, we had bipartisan support for a heat standard bill that came out of actually a representative and a senator in Miami-Dade County propose it at the state level, and it never made it out of committee. It made it out of one committee, but not the other, so it never was heard by the legislature 2 years in a row. So we're now looking at what we can do locally, right? I'm currently finalizing with our risk department a standard operating procedure for all 28 departments of Miami-Dade County, because we have a lot of probably over 5,000 workers that are exposed to heat. just Miami-Dade County. And then two commissioners have proposed an outdoor protection ordinance. The first reading was in July. That first reading, it passed unanimously to be heard at a committee meeting next month. It applies to construction and agriculture workers. And it would be, if passed as it is currently, it would be the strongest heat protection legislation in the country, stronger than the state ordinances that California or Washington or Oregon have, or I think Minnesota has one. So we'll see how that goes. Of course, we do work in a interesting state department where a state political climate where local ordinances have a way of getting preempted.
And we have no Department of Labor in Florida.
And we have no Department of Labor, but we are partnering with OSHA here locally on a series of trainings. We have some trainings at the end of the month. We did also with University of South Florida. We did a heat stress summit, prevention summit for employers in July. And now we're doing 2 with OSHA in English and Spanish at the end of this month, virtually. And to really try to just raise awareness for employers about what a good heat safety plan looks like, how it can improve productivity, actually reduce costs, and try to build it from an incentive base first. And we'll see if we can also achieve enforcement regulation.
Thank you. I'd love to get a copy of that ordinance, and I'll reach out to you.
Okay, yeah, please. I'll send it to you. Rachel, or did Scott, you want to go from?
Rachel, go ahead.
Oh, she took her hand down.
Okay. Okay.
Or do you want to go, Rachel? Just.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. When you were talking, it just struck me, you were talking about some of your projects there. Oh, she's having some tech issues. Sorry about that. Hopefully
just
she'll be
raise
able to.
Hand again when you think you've.
Yeah, or if you've got a question or something, you could put it in the chat room. Yeah. It struck me when you were talking a little bit about, showing the graphs, of course, and then talking about some of the research that you've done. It actually we've got, university faculty on, we've got some high school faculty on this call. Do you need any interns from any of those populations to do any of this work for you? Or do you have some projects that folks could say, hey, I've got these students who are capable of doing some analysis. Can you do that? Can you take this problem and run with it? I don't know if you would do that sort of thing.
So I am seeking a intern from UM right now, and possibly one from FIU. And I'm working with I welcome the idea. Our capacity is a little limited for monitoring, so it depends on the project, but we do work with universities. There's a very robust research group called the Urban Heat Research Group that's coordinated through University of Miami, and FIU participates. Other university professors, university representatives participate, and it's a lot of grad students, and it really, that's a great resource to see where the research needs are and where the opportunities are. So I can also, please just reach out to me and I'll connect you, get you linked into that if anyone's interested in that. For instance, one professor from UM School of Health is going to help with, we have these new lower advisory and warning thresholds in Miami-Dade County this heat season that we've been testing, and we're testing our messaging. But we don't have a good evaluation of that intervention. And so he's going to work with some of his students to do a door-to-door canvassing and in the targeted areas that we've been targeting our messaging, so that it can help just try to get, so things like that are really useful. We have grad students who've been monitoring heat health in people's homes. Others that have done a series of surveys of outdoor workers. So, there's a lot of different needs out there. I just have a limited capacity to manage it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Sort of along those lines, but I wonder, one of the things that I hope we might do is actually, if teachers or our educators who are on the call said, hey, that struck me as something that I can try in my classroom, trying to do some kind of analysis that may be something similar to what you've done that you showed. And
I'm sorry, you just made me think of another thing we did
go ahead.
With high schools, actually, and middle schools. So I don't know, this is where I brought in arts too. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Dranoff Foundation and their what's it called? It's a spoken word with music combination performance they do every year. Anyway, they had the theme last year was all about urban heat island and trees. And I got our urban forester to work with them and FIU, and they put sensors in the school around the properties of the schools, temperature and humidity sensors, and the kids could really try to understand the microclimates depending on whether it was in a big, at a basketball court versus under a tree kind of thing. And so that was a good project.
Yeah, that's great. Any of our
sensors are very cheap.
Have any of our teachers think they want to run with something like that, or have some other idea they want to, that they just
And Dream and Green actually has some really good urban heat island lesson plans.
Oh, did they? Okay. Great. Well, we'll see. Does anybody else have any sort of thoughts about brainstorming ideas for Jane or other teachers? Oh, look, we got some good feedback. They would love that. I like that idea. So great.
And any data you collect, from your students, I would love to see it. Yes.
David's sort of said he'd love to connect folks to UM through some of these faculty members there.
Yeah, and all those faculty members are part of our urban heat research group.
Oh, nice. Great.
Yeah.
Great. You guys should take good notes here.
Catherine Mock is very knowledgeable, not just on heat, on climate change. She was part of the UN
IPCC. Yeah, great. Oh, amazing. Okay. Fantastic. Anybody else have some thoughts about things that they heard, or you guys have access to some of this equipment? You just mentioned that you would take the data that's generated and do something with it if they were in Broward, or just Miami-Dade?
Probably. Well, it depends on if it could inform something that would be applicable in Miami-Dade.
Okay.
It might be interesting. Yeah. But I know, the Broward County is also doing their own, developing a lot of research around heat. And
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is that are you at this point the only chief heat officer in the compact? And folks,
yes.
And I don't know if I think everybody on the call is, no, not everybody is from South Florida, but Mary's not.
No.
But I don't know if other parts of the state is anybody else do we have any other chief heat officers in the state?
No, but I think Pinellas County is thinking about it, but
okay.
Yeah, no, not yet. The only other two in the country that I'm aware of are in Phoenix and LA.
Okay, that's it, the three of you. Okay. And then some out of country folks. Okay, very good. Rachel had something that she was saying. She said some opportunity for students. Was that great citizen science heat island project, and that's I'd like to see in South Florida. And then she gave the link for that.
Yeah.
We go citizen sciences.
Yeah, FIU Shading Dade has an initiative that engages students in putting sensors in public spaces.
Right. No, that's a great projects. Do they do it in the, oh, you said public spaces, so it's not only on the school grounds, it's in different
No,
areas.
it's that
Okay.
Shading Dade is, bus stops and
Oh,
park
very good.
benches and
Okay, fantastic. Candace, yes, we'll hopefully get a recording of this and I'll send it along, especially if you join our network, which I'll give you some information before we leave. Jane, I talked to you 2 years ago. How has your job changed in the last couple of years since you first started there? Has it changed?
yeah. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, we're now less in planning and more in implementation at this point. So we just rolled out. This season has been our second heat season campaign. Last year we won 3 awards and engaged 3.7 million people. I don't have the analysis this year yet, but we have tried some new things of bus wraps and a little more messaging for outdoor workers since they are so much more vulnerable, and a lot more trainings this year. So this year, like we started with the disaster volunteer trainings. This year we added the summer camp volunteers, the cooling site staff. Now we're doing worker, employer trainings. We started actually also with healthcare practitioners in partnership with Florida Clinicians for Climate Action and Baptist Health. And then we've rolled out the new advisory and warning thresholds, updated our emergency response this year. Was really had to activate our advisories and warnings like they'd never had to before. So it was new experience. I'm finalizing a plan, urban forestry plan, to get to 30% tree canopy, where we're really focusing on the areas that need it the most. And we're waiting to hear. We've submitted 3 different grants totaling over $26 million that we're very hopeful for to activate that plan.
Have the schools been involved in any kind of tree planting stuff?
Yes. We have a formal MOU with them now, and the county's offering technical assistance and matching grants. We're working with some specific school sites on planting plans, but the school has to raise their match still, the school district. But there are nonprofits like Citizens for a Better South Florida and the Education Fund that have provided trees for, and even Dream and Green has had funding for trees on school sites. But now we're trying to formalize it into a much more targeted, particularly in the areas that we need those trees the most, to invest.
Right. I know David, is that David that just, I had a question or a comment from David. He said, we name hurricanes, why don't we name heat episodes, I guess, or these events that we've been.
Yeah, so that's something that our Rock Resilience Center, which we've been a part of since before I was appointed, and it was really in part their advocacy to our mayor that created my position. But they've been advocating for naming heat waves, and I think it makes sense in certain areas where when you get a heat wave, it's really dramatically higher temperatures than what you're used to. Like they had the heat dome in the Pacific Northwest a couple of years ago or something like that. That really makes sense. But here in South Florida, the difference, we have chronic high heat, so we can have heat illnesses the whole summer, and it's hard to define a heat wave. This summer we've definitely had one, but it's just a steady increases in heat related illnesses. There's no like big spike that happens as the temperatures go up. So I'm not sure it makes sense here, but it definitely makes sense in other areas. And Sevilla, Spain is doing that. They're naming their heat waves.
Huh.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nina just sort of gave a reference there to an article on shade equity.
Yeah.
You familiar with that one? Oh, that's interesting. Have to look at that.
Yes,
So-
David, it is. We are like frogs in a pot. I agree.
Yeah, it's basically the shade equity article highlights this disparities between minority versus the majority, and the investing related to putting more trees in certain areas. So it's a really great read if you have the time.
Great. I'll take a look.
Mary's got a question.
Yeah, I serve on the utility board here in Winter Park. We have our own municipal utility, and we just got around to passing, because I kept bringing it up. We needed some sort of a heat policy on disconnects.
Yes.
And they adopted what Duke has been doing, and I was curious about Florida Power and Light.
Yeah.
Had conversations with them, and what is their policy?
Yeah. Actually, Clio Institute really led a lot of advocacy on that. And I believe it's a threshold of 95. And I'm not sure that they stop shutoffs, but they did agree to having a threshold. I believe it's 95. What is Duke's?
Well, apparently, the idea is if NOAA announces a heat alert, then that's part of the calculation, but they're looking for a heat index number of 105,
Yeah,
which is awfully high. Boy,
that's very high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And repeat what happens at that point. They have to turn it. They can't turn the electricity off.
They on
can't-
the day of.
Yeah, people haven't been able to pay. They can't turn off the.
Right. Now, if they've already turned off, they stay turned off. There's no, that's not in the policy. So it's, yeah, could be very, very scary, I think.
Yeah. That's why our LIHEAP program is so important. And you know that during this summer, the LIHEAP is the low income heating an electric assistance program, I think is what it stands for. But it pays for people's utility bills when they're in crisis, and to keep them going for a certain limited amount. Anyway, there was some mishap at the state agency that runs that program, even though there were plenty of federal dollars, and they ran out of approved funds. And so all our counties in Florida didn't have access to that program in the middle of July.
Oh, no.
June, July, it just got back. So it was really a big challenge this year.
That didn't get in the news that I never saw.
There was an article that just came out in the Herald, but yeah, there was not much. It was pretty under the radar.
Yeah. Wow.
Thank you. How do you get them? I know you're working with schools, as you mentioned. Do you get messages about the heat out to the schools, or how does that work if you have?
Yeah, for heat, so a couple ways. For heat advisories and warnings, they will get from our emergency management, it goes out to schools, et cetera. But that's only if the heat index gets to 105. We've done some outreach to make sure the schools have all our heat season materials and education, but I think it's definitely an opportunity for us to do more on this, because I haven't done extensive, like, figure out Well, there's health clinics, and then there's the PE teachers and coaches that might make sense to really talk about some of this.
In places that don't have a chief heat officer, which sounds like most of the country,
Yeah.
where do they get that information? Do they get that information in the schools if there's a heat advisory from some health
Yeah, they
department
would
or
get it.
something?
Yeah, they would from the National Weather Service, or
Okay.
probably the whatever the emergency management lead, which here it's our counties or our leads. So if your county emergency manager would probably send it out.
Okay. Any more questions for, we're kind of winding close to the 8 o'clock hour here. And I want to see if anybody has any. I'll advise you all sign up for the decentralized approach. Noah Davidson.
Yeah, no, that's good advice from David. Agreed.
A volunteer. What is that? WRN. What's that mean?
Sorry, it's Weather Ready Nation Ambassador.
Oh, okay.
It's through your local NWS will feed you information. You also get access to whoever your NWS your local officer is.
Okay.
Yep, and yep. The great thing is that it holds you accountable. You become responsible. So, yep.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you. I think we're gonna wind down. I'm gonna put up. I'm gonna share my screen if I can get back to this, because I'm gonna. Let me see if I can do this without getting here. Let's see if I can start this thing up. I just wanted to make sure I record this. If I make a movie out of this, I want to put this at the front if I can. It doesn't look like it's letting me. Let me see if I can get me on this. Here. I don't think you guys can see that. Let me see. Oh, wow. Oh, well. Okay, let me go back and stop the share here. Anyway, so I want to thank Jane very much for this wonderful presentation and a great inaugural session for us, and some great input from all of you, and some good ideas. It sounded like a number of you sort of came away with some ideas about ways to implement some of this and with your students. So we appreciate that very much. I'm going to add in the chat room there, you're going to see a link. Encourage you to sign up to be part of our Google group and our member, and we'll send you some email if you want to fill out that short form with your name and email address. And appreciate everybody taking part in this. So once again, I think next month we're actually going to have Clio at the September 27th. That'll be our final date here for our next presentation, and I will let you know about that. So thanks to everybody, and I'm going to see if I can play around with this and get the share screen on. If anybody wants to stay around and talk for a few minutes, you're welcome to do that. And thanks again. Appreciate you attending our first session.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott.